Hi, everyone. My name's Tim Donovan, and this is my premiere podcast. Um, and today's guest is Monica Smith. And Monica, I met a couple months ago, and we had lunch in Lutherville, and I thought of her just for my premiere podcast for Be More Couple Center, mainly for her enthusiasm and her just real independent streak that I think will come across through the interview. Um, and before we get started, and I'll let Monica introduce herself too, I'm just going to share, some brief background about Monica. She's a board certified recovery coach and certified resilience trainer, and she has a master's in forensic psychology and advanced training in counseling and sexual health coaching. And she's also the founder of the Clear Mind Project, which we'll find more about today. And she just really brings this strength based, science backed approaches to help individuals, couples, and the recovery community at large heal from sexual addiction, intimacy struggles, or just really self defeating patterns while building resilience and well being. In addition to, or I'll say in concurrent with her Clear Mind project, she's also the Chief Flourishing Officer at DTC Incorporated, where she just brings the idea of flourishing to healthy, vigorous, and a kind of growth mode um, possibilities in the environment where she works, just really to support colleagues and clients and grow the organization. And so she really has about 17 years of both personal and professional recovery development work. And Monica blends really wisdom, empathy, research. She really ties many aspects of the work together in the science of flourishing and just helping people heal in their journeys and their professional growth. And so I will let Monica, with that introduction, anything you want to add about yourself?
It's so weird to hear yourself introduced while you're listening to it. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for having me. I I don't think I have anything else to add based on what you covered. I have my private practice and my organizational role as well. So I'm just excited to be here.
Really glad and happy to have that you're here. Tell me just how or why did you become a recovery coach?
Yes, good question. So but as I was going through college and then in my master's, I had a whole other career in consulting, actually professional services consulting, and interestingly was introduced to coaching in that world. I was fortunate enough to be part of a company that we had milestone promotion awards, and one of my milestone promotion awards was to go have a weekend coaching experience with other professional coaches, and it was really life-changing for me. And I was pursuing, my master's forensic psych. I was did completing the postmaster's LCPC for counseling at Loyola, but I was just struck by some of the nuances of the coaching model, understanding there's a lot of overlap, in some ways and not in other ways, but the idea of the strengths-based focus, the idea of trying to take people from functioning to thriving,
Uh-huh.
the idea of being more forward focused, I kind of pivoted and decided that I really wanted to focus more from a coaching lens and be a complementary partner to therapists and the therapy community out there. So that was sort of the coaching pivot for me. And then I actually had a lot of personal recovery and addiction experience in my relationship, and became really passionate about that focus through my personal experiences with it.
Okay. So it sounds like one journey led to another journey.
Pretty much, yes. A
Uh,
very long, winding road.
yeah. But one thing I remember from our lunch is you were really passionate about bringing positive psychology into this. And so
Yep.
just tell me a little bit before we dive in, what just what it was it about positive psychology or building that into addiction recovery?
Yep. So I'm obsessed with books, in case you can't tell from my background. And one of the books I read kind of around that time frame in my life was Flourish by Martin Seligman, which I strongly recommend, and became really interested in positive psychology. So I pursued basically a positive psychology practitioner training program through the Flourishing Center in New York.
Okay.
And as I was in that program, I was so struck by everything I was learning. Carol Dweck's mindset research, um, post-traumatic growth research, the idea of meaning making and how important making meaning and purpose is to how we are as humans. All of these things I was exposed to, I was realizing I haven't heard about any of this
Okay.
in my recovery experience. And my recovery experiences and all of that served me incredibly well. I would not be here without all of those things. But I realized all of these research areas are being applied in corporate world, they're being applied in schools, they're being applied in sports, peak performance coaching. They all applied to what people I witnessed and my personal recovery journey. And I saw this big gap, that this could really benefit that community as well.
That's interesting. So for you, there was something missing here.
Yes, it was. And I will say, I think, this was back in 2017 when I was in that program. I think we've come a long way. I know there are other amazing practitioners out there that are starting to weave in and become more familiar with these things, which is awesome. But for me, it was a big gap that I saw that these topics, I remember bringing up the idea of post-traumatic growth in some of my groups, and no one had ever heard of post-traumatic growth at the time. And this what community other than those that have dealt with addiction and trauma could benefit more from post-traumatic growth research, right? As an example. And so, the other connection I saw was in positive psychology, we talk about the illness wellness continuum. So you got illness on one end, let's say -10, you've got 0 in the middle, and then you've got +10, +10, the wellness side. And just as in recovery, they talk about the absence of, abstinence doesn't equal recovery. Like you can abstain from something.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you've recovered, right? That doesn't mean you've transformed. And similarly, the absence of illness does not equal wellness. It just equals 0. You're at
Right.
0. And I saw a lot of recovery experiences of people getting to that 0, meaning I've made all this progress from -10 to 0, and I'm sort of neutral. And positive psychology is about life above neutral. It's like there's a whole other life out there beyond just neutral. And I saw that connection too, that if you're just hovering in sort of like I'm not using or I'm abstaining or I'm sober or whatever it is, you're, there's a whole continuum out there that I think is an opportunity that not everyone's being exposed to.
Yeah, I think that really is important because a lot of people can be thinking it's just the absence of. And so if you're not using or you're sober, like there's a difference between the gap and the gain, and
Exactly.
it's a real growth mindset. And it sounds like, you know, at least to me, what you've said, that's sort of the big idea that you want people to understand about flourishing and recovery. It's not just the absence of, it's what you add to it. And so that um, can you give me like a concrete example of what this looks like?
Well, oh my gosh. I could say so many things on that.
Just
But I mean,
one.
yeah, I know, right? That's going to be hard for me. I'm going to try to rein myself in. Um, one, well, okay. So I can say that, um, one of the examples is there's a great book called Practicing Positive Psychology Coaching, I want to say is what it's called. And the author talks about, actually it's an actual positive diagnosis. So the to counteract, right, or to go along with, to complement the dysfunction and the stuff that absolutely needs to be paid attention to. But he talks about, so let's look at your capacity, let's do strengths assessments, let's do values assessments, let's identify what you're passionate about. There's all of these kinds of things. I mean, again, mindset research alone, I feel like from a recovery standpoint, there's so much application. And, we know, like, just think about confirmation bias. We know that the beliefs we're walking around with is the evidence we see more of.
Right.
So, to some degree, that traditional recovery, we just have to be careful. There's so much benefit to it, but we have to be careful because it's reinforcing this sort of pathology and this life of limitation to some degree idea. And so if that's the lens we're looking through, that is what we will see in ourselves, in the life that we create. So I think I don't know if I'm answering your question. The example would be spending, first of all, of course, get through the pathology, get through the complete and utter destruction and dysfunction. Of course. I mean, this is not to instead of, this is in addition to,
Right.
but spend time, the importance of investing time in those inherent traits that we all do have. We all do have strengths. We all do have passions. We all do have values. And spending just as much time exploring that, I think is a more balanced, approach. Again, that complements traditional and existing approaches, doesn't replace, but complements.
No, but it is kind of what you're saying. You're kind of describing what one might notice that's different about this approach. That
Mhm.
it isn't just the again, like you were saying before, you could, you know, often in the addiction field, I'm not saying fully in the recovery field, people focus on what's broken, symptoms, relapses, pathology, which on one hand are important. And how do
Absolutely.
you see, though, positive psychology shifting that lens?
I think I just see it as the other side of the story. Again, I think, first of all, I'm going to take this opportunity because it's like, it's a thing. Positive psychology is completely misunderstood and it gets a bad, reputation as like, just think positive all the
Right.
time and just be happy, smile. That is not what it is. It is the research of what it takes for humans to thrive and truly well-being, like that's what it is, and it gets widely misunderstood. But I think it's really just to me it's about, don't stop at neutral, don't stop at sobriety, don't stop at maintaining, continue continue to build the rest of the story from there. And I will steal from one of my husband's therapists years ago. She said, it has always stuck with me. She said the best relapse prevention is to live a big life.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? I mean, it's like, keep going, continue to, obviously get some stability in your life, but then truly do that deeper work of who are you really and who do you want to be and what are all of your inner resources, and do just as much on that side of yourself as you did on all of the things that were dysfunctional and pathological and, all of that stuff. It's just keep going, I think. And so I see positive psychology just coming in and filling in the rest of the story, because I think that right now, and again, generalizing, the story is half told a
Right.
lot of the time, and then it just kind of stops there.
Well, it sounds like there's a real intrinsic quality to it, in that
Yes,
this is not like being um, extrinsically imposed. It's just something you're developing and enhancing your own capacities over time. And that in some ways, that's wherever you focus, your energies, or wherever, that's where things will grow and go. And you won't have to worry about just avoiding or not making bad things happen. What
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
What are there any examples of stories just from your own practice or even research where applying positive psychology really changed the trajectory of someone's recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have a couple of thoughts on this. I mean, one, and this isn't about my specific experience personally, but I think kind of going back to that idea of living a big life, I think if we all look at anecdotally what we see in terms of the people that are the most successful in long-term recovery, or sobriety, are generally people who are have made meaning out of their pain.
Hmm.
They're people that have strong relationships. They are usually engaged in some sort of meaningful work or some sort of purpose, even if it's using their experience, their pain as their purpose, which happens a lot in the recovery world. They're taking that and they're being of service, which is inherent in the 12 steps. It's using it and being of service. But all of those are pieces, relationships, meaning and purpose, positive emotions, positive mindset. Those are all pieces of positive psychology. And we see that the people that have the most sustained success, typically they are living a big life. They're living life north of neutral. So I think that just anecdotally, that's kind of what we see. I can say I've run a group program here and there over the years where it's a positive psychology version of the 12 steps. And I always do a pre and a post assessment. And so I've seen, and again, this isn't official research. This is just me doing a pre and a post assessment, but I've seen in every group that I've run, I've seen increases in success, whether it's sobriety or maybe relationships or mindset, sense of meaning. I've seen those in my sort of pre and post surveys, of which very small population, obviously. I think the other thing I would say, bigger picture, and again, this sort of gets at a little bit, they've had some really interesting efforts for many years in Portugal, um, which I don't want to take you down too much of a rabbit hole. I can definitely do rabbit holes, but I'm going to try to land the plane. Essentially, they've for many, many years now, they've been diverting a lot of funds that they would have normally spent in law enforcement and to employers to support internship programs and employment programs for those in recovery. And
Well,
they've seen some really great success. Now, granted, there needs to be a lot more research, and that's the other thing. A lot of this stuff doesn't get the research funding and the research attention, but they've seen pretty consistent success in some of the big picture social statistics, whether it's overdose reduction, HIV, longer sustained recovery. So there are some things out there, and I think what that hits on from a positive psychology standpoint is, again, meaning and purpose, which is a big part of well-being. Be the ability to make meaning out of this painful experience and do something of purpose. So, I mean, again, I could probably talk for another 3 hours about this, but
but it's a real investment, even with like at what's going on in Portugal. It's really an investment, and in a place work where people spend a lot of their time at anyway, and helping them, you know, make that transition either back to work or maintain their work and not have to lose that grounding even while they're in treatment or recovery. And so so for someone who has been thinking of terms of pathology and problems, how do they start making that shift to thinking about flourishing? Like, what's that bridge look like?
yeah, I mean, what I usually say, and again, this is maybe a very basic idea, but I think a couple of things I usually point people to. One, and again, this is sort of how I was trained from the Flourishing Center, is there is a well-being model. So PERMA V. PERMA was Martin Seligman's model of well-being, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, meaning and purpose and achievement. And then the Flourishing Center, as I was trained, added V for vitality. So going out there and even just searching PERMA or PERMA V and learning more, those are the pathways to well-being. And so that just looking at that framework and understanding like, oh, this is the big picture of myself as a human, and really starting to dig into maybe one of those. What is my mindset like? What can I do in my relationships in my life? So, PERMA and PERMA V, I always encourage people research it and become familiar with just that as a framework and a concept.
Right.
But even simpler than that, there are free values assessments and strengths assessments. And just one simple thing for everyone to do is just go out there. There should be a free one called VIA Values in Action. It's a website. There's a strengths assessment. Just learn what your strengths are. Like, and then when you see that, look for examples of that in your life. Look for examples of that when you were a kid, because that reveals a lot. Like, these are inherent in who I am and what I came here to be. Start researching yourself in that way, with that lens. What do I really value? How do I see it showing up? I spent a long time with my strengths and a Post-it note on my computer, because I just wanted to be reminded, like, oh, these are things I can bring to the table in a situation. I think just those little things can start helping people's mind shift a little bit into that direction.
It really intrigues me. It's like people are really, you have the idea of people self-defining, and instead of looking outward, look inward first, so that they can
Yeah.
even identify or even grow those things that they would like to be able to do, to be better at, or we're not all equally gifted to be good at everything from the starting point. I'm curious,
Yes.
is what kind of, I don't know, resistance have you encountered when you introduce these ideas? And what does that tell you about the field right now?
So, well, first of all, the one of the areas of resistance is that people don't necessarily understand what positive psychology means. And so when you bring up those words, it sort of brings again this really negative association, which is thinking more positively. So that's one area of resistance, that it kind of just gets dismissed. Similarly, I think well-being is, I think, interpreted as yoga and meditation, which are super helpful and great components, but that's not really what well-being means either, right? So I think some of it's just sort of dismissing it as kind of a sort of BS thing. I also can say, in the 12-step world, and having been part of that myself, and had been received great value from that. But it is, you know, some of the resistance I've seen in that world a little bit is that when you start to talk about the ability to evolve beyond that, there's in some situations it can be seen as like risky thinking, right? Like, okay, well, if you're expanding your world and you're talking about whether it's possible to evolve beyond that, and I'm treading very carefully because I know this is sensitive,
Oh,
um,
this is
it
what I
it
had to.
can be interpreted, right? Like it can be interpreted as like, well, that's just your sick thinking coming back, right? Or that's, this idea that like, no, you have to be in this, you have to do this for the rest of your life, in this way.
Right.
And so that there's a little bit of resistance there. And again, like that, I'm going to use the 12-step world, like that is one tool, and it's can be a hugely transforming tool, but it is one tool, and there is only one set of literature that people are exposed to in that world. Meanwhile, research is evolving. We know so much more today about ourselves as humans and relationships and well-being than back when that was formed. And so if people aren't exposed, like, now I'm not even saying discontinue that, but make sure we get exposed. And there can be sort of this sense of just kind of protecting this philosophy and this mindset, and it can be a little closed. And so I've gotten some of that. And then the only other thing I can say is, and this is sort of going down another rabbit hole, but I've if there are more kind of open-minded approaches, to someone who has struggled to stay sober, and they want to just pursue something that's completely sort of in a different lane, there is some judgment and some shame there. Um, and I'll just, even the people who continually are not able, kicked out of IOP programs. I mean, for reasons that they're not complying with the rules, which I get, but then they're out there hanging.
Right. There has to be other pathways for recovery, and I
Exactly.
think too is, partly what you're saying is there's a fear.
Hmm.
I often think with resistance where, as I see mainly couples, and I think of it as I often tell couples, it's really not for me just the absence of problems or communicating better. It's like, what do you want to create here in your relationship?
Exactly.
And having them take some time to define it. Because either way, whether they talk about it or not, they are defining it. But here you're able to have more of a shared vision. When we met,
Exactly.
yeah, when we met for lunch, we were talking about a lot also about sexual addiction and intimacy.
Mhm.
And we just, you, which I think is I see the smile on your face, like this is the passionate part for you about
Yes.
bridging this gap between uh, CSAT, which is
Mhm.
what is CSAT again? It's
Well, CSAT is like the Patrick Carnes, model and approach, which is certified sex addiction therapist, sort of that trauma-based, Patrick Carnes addiction-based model. Yes.
exactly. And then there's ASAC, which is a really large organization,
Yes.
about which is I think the American Association of Sex Education and
Sexual educators, coaches, and therapists. I think it's much more in the sexual health, sexual education and sexual health realm of things.
what so and so there's this gap between them about if you will their approaches to sexual health.
Mhm.
So let me just give a little bit of background for the listeners. So you've heard Monica talk about the acronym of these two organizations. And one really tends to use an addiction and trauma informed lens, and the others is a kind of structured and 12 steps, I'm going to say, oriented. And, ASEC is really for therapists and coaches and counselors where they approach sexual concerns more broadly. And they kind of using a sexual health framework that just emphasizes various practices and doesn't necessarily frame them as an addiction. And so I just wanted to, if I've given that background accurately, so feel free to correct me if I haven't, but what strengths do you see in each?
Yeah, absolutely. You framed it correctly. I think the sexual addiction world, again, the Patrick Carnes sort of the world. I mean, the benefit of that is it very much is the same approach as AA, as NA. Again, there's 12-step meetings. It's a 12-step approach. And a trauma-informed approach, which is very helpful and important, especially for as that is a key component often for those who struggle in this area. The benefit is there is structure, there is accountability, there's a model to follow that's been long standing. There is accessibility even, there's meetings, it's easily accessible. The benefit that I see to that, if I zoom out, is that there's habit, there's the power of story, there's connection in those 12-step meetings and in that approach. There's a lot of safety in that. I think there's a recognition, again, this word, codependency is talked about, and there's controversy these days on all of that. But the bottom line is it's the recognition that in most cases, like we're coming to the table with some stuff, and that contributes to how we get into these relationships and these experiences. So benefit there, and certainly successful recovery experiences from that lens. However, and sort of the benefit of the other side, the sexual health world is it is a much broader understanding and education around sexuality in general. And what I've noticed, and so there is recognition that it can become dysfunctional. They would not call it an addiction, but they would say like out of control sexual behavior. So there is a recognition that it can become out of control damaging, but it's with with sort of the container that, you know, how we each define that matters in the context of how we are as sexual beings and sexuality through history and what it looks like in our relationship and what's going on in our brain and all of those things. And so I think there is it is sex in and of itself, the arousal patterns, they can be pathologized in the sex addiction world.
Right.
Unintentionally, I think,
Right.
as part of as the recovery process unfolds. And I think in the sexual health lens, less so. And so where I see people can get stuck, if they're entering the traditional sexual addiction path and they're working through individual couple, working through it, if all of that goes as planned, which it doesn't always, but if that progression continues and they're making good progress, they sort of reach a point where, again, I'll go back to that illness wellness continuum example. They don't necessarily, there's fear and maybe even some reinforced shame of progressing to this next level. Okay, what does healthy sexuality now look like? We've had all of this trauma, we've had all of these challenges, and I've seen the person with the SA experience, they just can swirl in that shame because sex and arousal has gotten mixed in with pathology, the idea of pathology. And this gets real juicy and tricky. So let's just take attraction to a same-sex partner in a marriage, and I've acted out in that way. Well, the SA lens might say that is all part of your acting out behavior. And the sexual health lens might ask you some different questions.
Right. Actually,
All of which as a partner is very triggering. You know what I mean? This is the issue is it's all very triggering depending on where someone is in the process. But, kind of they both have something to offer, which I know is what you and I talked about at lunch. And I wish they weren't at such odds.
right.
Because they both have pieces to offer.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit. You're talking about same-sex couples or polyamorous couples. There's a lot more to the agreement and what have you there. But one camp could look at the other and say, well, that's really not healthy, or this is just another way of acting out, and
Exactly.
and so that and when you talk about arousal, I would think I imagine you know who Emily Nagoski is, and
Yes.
and so like and so that book that she has about accelerators and brakes and arousal and sort of like everything you experience, okay, it's sort of like how you implement it really makes the difference in some ways. What would you want a couple to know about rebuilding intimacy during recovery that most people don't realize?
So I do think, and having experienced it myself and also witnessed and worked with many couples in this, I do think that there is a period of time when that initial healing stage is happening, especially when there's been a lot of betrayal, years of betrayal, right? And dishonesty. It's just too sensitive to delve into some of these, when you get into true sexuality, like there's a period of time where it's really sensitive and difficult. However, what I would say is if a couple truly wants to get to a thriving, like not just like a sobriety experience as a couple, but like a thriving relationship and a thriving life, they have to be willing to create enough safety in their relationship to talk about these deep sexual topic. Like they got to be able to talk about it at a deeper level than most of us are comfortable with. We aren't taught how to do it in school, right? And I think that is something, the willingness on both sides, willingness for the person who's gone through the SA experience and is terrified to broach any of the subject, may not even feel they're deserving of it because they've messed up so many times. And for the partner who can be so easily triggered and terrified, rightly so, that they really have to be willing to create enough safety to really have those conversations. And there's an amazing gift on the other side of it if they can get there.
Yeah, and it's a hard, when I see couples around infidelity, I often tell the person who's betrayed their partner, instead of your partner being the one to bring it up all the time, it would be a real relief to your partner to hear you bring it up and share what you've learned or what you've been thinking about it. Um, it won't be like that will institute trust, but it is one of the stepping stones to trust and to being able to be more intimate and to talk about things, um, which are hard to do. I mean, how do you have a difficult? That is what couple therapy is in some ways. No matter what it is how do you have a conversation under stress? And so, no matter if you're talking about what you experience, it isn't like a really joyous conversation, but it is an important one to have.
Yeah, and I would just add, and you're bringing up something important, and this is again, um, in the sexual health world, like in the sexuality coach AASECT world, it is a requirement to go through a SAR, a sexual attitude reassessment process, where as a practitioner, we have to confront our own attitudes about sex and our own biases and our own experiences, because as you know, we can't help but bring that into I mean, we can't, we're humans, right? We're bringing that into the room and it is filtering the lens that we see the experience through. And so I think this is something, and again, this is, I remember being at a conference and actually it was Patrick Carnes. I was hearing him speak and he asked the whole room full of therapists and practitioners, how many of you ask your clients what kind of porn they're watching? And you could have heard a pin drop in the in the room, right? Because that made everybody uncomfortable to even as practitioners to think about. But the reality is that stuff matters,
Yeah.
obviously in this world, but it actually matters even for those not working on sexual addiction because it's such a big part of our life and our relationships. And if we're not also confronting within ourselves what those things are, it's going to change our comfort level in helping people confront it.
Yeah. And if you can't be open and with them or take the lead in that, it's really going to be hard for them to open up. And I think in couples or individuals in that sense, if they don't feel like you can handle it, they're not going to really want to bring it up themselves at the same time. So
Yep.
tie in positive psychology here. You've started off this, fulcrum from what you work from that has really been exciting to you to add to the field. And you have this, if you will, subspecialty of intimacy and sexual addiction recovery. Um, tie that together.
Yeah. So I think that again, if I use the PERMA V model, right, positive, the well-being, the pathways to well-being, two of those are relationships and vitality. And so to me, sexuality, and this is why it's complicated. It's more complicated than substances because it's embedded in our being, in our being as humans, and we're wired for connection. I think that we're wired to strive for more, generally, I think it's part of the human experience to strive for more. So, positive psychology, like in the sexual addiction lens, I would say let's not just focus on the pathology of how sex has played out in an addictive way in your life. Let's focus on, okay, do that part so we can get some stability and rebuild trust and safety. But now, what is thriving? Can you have a thriving relationship where you still are avoiding this topic? Can you have a thriving relationship where everyone's still in fear around sexuality? Can you feel vital as a human when this is a part of your life that is still struggling? Whether you have shame, whether there's secrecy, whether that you can't talk to your partner about it, whether you judge yourself for the things that are part of your arousal template. I mean, that is the thriving aspect, I would say, that ties into kind of that next stage of recovery, or whatever you want to call it in the sexual world.
And so, what gives you hope right now about where the field is headed and what you're describing?
I definitely, I mean, I definitely do have hope. Again, I kind of think back to just where things were even when I was in the positive psych program in 2017. I mean, we're light years away from where we were then. And, the good and the bad of social media, it's like, a double-edged sword, but it does help to put some of these ideas in front of, more people, more humans. People are not as reliant anymore on practitioners like me and you. The stuff is out there. And so I think what brings me hope is that I do think that these areas are kind of becoming more blended. I think people are becoming a little more aware of, if nothing else, maybe just how complicated we are, how complex we are.
Right.
I do think that there's more openness. Um, so I think we're getting there, but there's still some gaps out there and some mindsets that I think have to change, and that's an ever evolving process. There's a lot of fear, which I get.
Yeah. Well, that for me makes me think of, like, just for listeners or clinicians or people in recovery, what's one practical step they can take to bring more of this flourishing mindset into their lives or work?
Yes, one practical step. I definitely would. So two things come to mind. One, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm so serious about, like, just figure out what your values and your strengths are. I mean, like, put them somewhere in your face. Put them on your mirror, put them in your car, put them on your phone, put them somewhere you're going to see them, because I think we just are spending so much time trying to avoid messing up and avoid the bad emotions and the mistakes, and not being the person we don't want to be from the past, and we just need it in our face, the things that we're bringing to the table. So that's like one thing I would strongly encourage everyone to do. And the other thing is just practice. It's that flipping it mentality. Like, if you think about something you're afraid of, that tells you what you desire. The other side of your fear is what you desire. So when you hear yourself thinking about a fear, ask yourself what that means about what you want. If you are noticing something you hate and that sucks, what is it that you see that is, good? And gratitude, again, it gets overplayed, but the bottom line is there's so much research on the effectiveness, right? So simple things that we're just better at identifying what isn't working. We're better at identifying what we don't want. Get into the habit of asking yourself the opposite of that. And over time, those little changes matter. Just bringing it more into the awareness, I would say, as a starting point.
Yeah, you really have to make it a practice, don't you?
Yes. Which is why I always say, like, put it in your face, because if it's not in my face, I will not remember. And everybody who knows me, who's close with me, knows, like, I write things on my hand, which is maybe not the best, the best habit. But if I really need to remember something, it's getting written on my hand, because that is the level of reminder I need sometimes in my face. And we're all like that, especially now. There's just a million distractions everywhere.
Yeah, I get that myself sometimes. get on one thing online, and I even forget what I was supposed to be doing actually.
Right. Yep,
So
I get that.
I want to, that's a great summary, and I want to just change it up a little bit. But so these are like my surprise questions.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, yeah, get a sip of water. Um, so my first one is, if you could have a dinner party with three
Mhm.
people, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. Um, boy, this is a tough one. So okay, so the first two that came to mind, I have to think about a third, and this is so weird. The first two that came to mind, actually, Sigmund Freud. It's not a cop out. I would truly find him fascinating to ask to ask questions of his brain. So like he would be one of them for sure. I just would want to pick his brain completely as to like how he came up with all of his all of his ideas. Um, Emerson, because I absolutely love a lot of his writings. So Emerson would be a big one. That it's some of the writings I find very inspiring. And then Erik Erikson, who I'm not that he has that famous African Violet story where he went to went to the woman's house that she had been depressed for a long time, and basically he focused on the one bright spot. I'm totally butchering and paraphrasing this, but like he went to the one bright spot, which was all of these African violets that she was growing, and essentially told her how selfish she was being for not sharing them with the world, and it kind of transformed her life in a lot of ways.
Are you talking about Milton Erickson or Eric Eric?
Milton Erickson, yes. Milton, sorry. Milton Erickson, yes. I don't know why I said Eric Erickson. Milton Erickson, exactly.
That
Yes. Those would
is,
be my three.
that is really in a Milton Erickson story. Yeah, I've always been impressed by him and his, um, Jay Haley wrote a book about him and about all the stuff that he's done. And he wrote a couple, one I really liked called February Man. And he's just full of these anecdotes and stories.
Yeah, absolutely love him. And I've read a lot by Bill O'Hanlon, who I know talks about him a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you wish you had but never bothered to learn?
What do I wish I had but never bothered to learn? Wish I had but never bothered to learn. Well, I one thing I never bothered to learn was how to drive a stick shift.
Okay. But did you want to?
Which I mean, there are a lot of times. I mean, would I say it's a driving force in my life that I feel like a burning desire? Not necessarily, but there are a lot of times in my life that I sort of I mean, I could learn it now, but like I do think about like why did you never learn this? If I needed to, I would have no clue what I was doing.
Yeah. I never,
I guess I would figure it out.
it's funny. I never had an automatic until about 3 years ago.
Really? Oh my gosh. I mean, it seems like it would be fun.
Yeah, I like it. I still like it, but I
Right.
don't have it now. If you weren't in this field, and I also know you have the work at DTC, what's a totally different career you could see yourself loving?
Oh, two things come to mind right away. One would be a dog trainer.
Okay.
I'm obsessed with all learning about I mean, I have had, I've had a lot of dogs. I'm passionate about animals, but I love learning about dog training. Like love it, love it, love it. And I mean, if I had more time, but I do a lot of reading around that and I like to experiment with my dogs. So that would definitely be a whole other career I would love to pursue. And then death doula, end of life doula
Oh,
would be
interesting.
an
Wow. Okay.
yes.
What a
Yes.
difference that is. What's one
Yeah.
surprising skill or hobby you have that most people wouldn't guess?
Um, I calligraphy, I would say.
Okay.
I was really obsessed with calligraphy when I was young, and I spent a lot of years learning it. And that is definitely not something I ever talk about.
And I guess currently in your own life, what are you currently learning or stretching into?
Well, right now, actually, I am focused a lot on leadership, partly because of the role that I now have that I'm so fortunate to have been given at DTC. And it all ties in, you know, to me, they're not separate things. I mean, they're separate manifestations, but those two, my practice and DTC, aren't really separate because they're all part of me showing up as continuous evolving versions of myself. But I'm really focused a lot on learning and digging into leadership principles and sort of evolving, as a leader. I've had a long career in, again, in consulting and in sort of the business corporate world, but this this leadership role is new for me. And I will tell you, it has been a very humbling experience so far. And I've learned how much I have to learn
Yeah.
about myself. And so that is something I'm currently really digging into a lot, and going to various conferences and things to try to expand my network there.
Oh, sounds like that's a real stretching there.
Yep.
What's your guilty pleasure?
My guilty pleasure. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna make myself sound really boring. My guilty pleasure. I mean, this really is going to sound boring, but like if I could construct my perfect day, it really would be that I'm like by a pool or water in the sun with a million books. And I know that sounds so lame. Um, but that would be like my ideal, like that would be my ideal day. And like I have food guilty pleasures, like like a lot of mac and cheese and um, like the traditional things. But yeah, I guess I sound kind of boring now that I'm saying this out loud.
I think guilty pleasures tend to be very simple things. They really are. They're not like flying first class on Air France. They're really more like you're saying, peanut butter and jelly and mac and cheese.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what's the message you hope people carry with them after hearing this conversation?
Um, I think I always want people to know that they're capable of more, and you're capable of more than you think, have more resources than you think. Came here to do a very specific thing, to be a very specific person at this point in time, and that regardless of what you've done, where you've been, you deserve and are capable, like you're truly, I just want everyone to know they deserve to live a thriving life. I really, um, regardless, regardless of what has happened, I think that's something I'm really passionate about, is those people who feel like it's hopeless, or can't ever see a way of getting there, that there is a whole other side, that I hope that they know that they're deserving of pursuing.
Okay. So, where can listeners find more about your work or get connected if they're curious?
So, if people go to clearmindproject.com, they will see a landing page that is going to tell them that my whole website is being redesigned. But from that page, there is a link, for now, there's a link to my Psychology Today profile, which will get them, my basic information, contact information. It's all on there. So I would still direct them there. It's a whole long story, but I essentially was trying to transfer my website from one company to myself, and I lost all of my content
Oh,
in
wow.
that process. Which to me was just like a wink from the universe that it was time, because it really needed to be updated for a long time and I was totally avoiding it. So it was just, to me, the universe was like, now you got to do it. So it's a temporary page, but it will link to my profile from there. So that's the best thing for people to do.
No, that's well, I will have some information on a page here too when I post this, so that people can reach out to you either by your website or phone or email. Um, well, I want to thank you for really agreeing to be the premier guest here, and I want to thank you for your vitality and just your passion about what you're bringing here with relationships and recovery and intimacy and you really I look forward to seeing how your work progresses.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everything you're doing to help practitioners and